Atheists are possibly the most hated members of our society, and probably simultaneously the most misunderstood. Find out why right now on the Atheist Forum. You are about to enter the no superstition zone of rational thinking and intellectual curiosity here on the Atheist Forum. Standing by for your questions or comments at 727-441-3000, where you can talk to a real live atheist here on Tan Talk 1340. Why in the world do people hate atheists so much? We're simply people who don't subscribe to any religious beliefs or what we consider superstitions. I think it has its roots back in the mid-50s after the Second World War, as the Cold War began taking roots, primarily in our culture I'm talking about, when the powers that be, as this Cold War began to evolve, had to delineate the difference between a capitalist system and a communist system. The capitalist system, well, you've got to remember that pretty much everybody alive in the 50s had lived through the Great Depression. So they saw that capitalism with its boom and bust can be really bust when it busts. And yet the communists were telling us that they could provide a job for every citizen, a house, food, education, and they were beginning to show technological advances, being the first to put a satellite in space with Sputnik, and of course the first man in space from the Russians. So now how to delineate the difference? Do we want a system that equally distributes wealth among the working class that generates it, or the capitalist system in its cyclical boom and bust, giving the rich large percentages of the income and the wealth, and the middle class being relatively stable and a lot of poor people? How to delineate the difference? Very simple. God is on our side. And by defining the capitalist system as the Christian system and saying God is on our side, therefore we're the good guys, because the Russians were not imposing, or I should say the Soviet Union at the time, and was not imposing religion on its citizenry. And so it was considered an atheist system, in spite of the fact, Jim, that capitalism is probably the antithesis of what is taught in, or what you would consider to be an economic system that you would find in the teachings of Christianity, whereas communism would lean more toward it, equal distribution of wealth instead of a few people having a lot and maybe a lot of people having very little, and the fact that democracy, civil liberties, civil rights, those issues, women's rights, children's rights, those issues are never addressed anywhere in Christianity. The only one that is, of course, is slavery.
Well, they never really had, in the times in which Christianity arose, what they call biblical times, such things as rights of any kind were not understood, were not addressed. The Roman Empire, which was the leading political organization of the time, did not recognize rights per se.
It was perfectly legal to kill your children if they upset you for any reason.
Of course.
But don't you both agree that this link of atheism to communism is what has generated so much contempt for atheism in the United States? Probably not nearly so much in Western Europe and pretty much any other part of the world, except maybe the Middle East.
I think it's certainly one of the major factors in the reason that people dislike the communist atheists. Anybody who reads the Bible's pretty clear about it. Non-believers are fools, and they're abominations, and they're all evil. So, the Bible's pretty clear on why atheists are to be despised as well.
But of course, few people seem to realize that there wasn't that much of a difference, really. Stalin, for instance, was a seminary student, and people, if you looked at people like Kim Il-sung and the current leader of North Korea and so forth, they run what is essentially a theocracy, even though it's called communist. It isn't really. It has features of the communist economic system, but on the other hand, society is organized like a theocracy, with the maximum leader at the top, and is regarded as something of a god. So the actual structure, the habits of religious ideas and feelings are being generated even currently by dictators and what do you call them? Absolutists of all kinds.
Well, if you've just joined us, you're listening to the Atheist Forum here on Tan Talk 1340, and we invite you to weigh in on our conversation at 441-3000. That's 441-3000, and if you're out of the area, call us toll-free at 866-826-1340, 866-826-1340. I'm Ed Golly. I'm joined on the set by Joe Reinhardt and Jim Peterson, and David in with us, David Williamson from Orlando. And we're going to talk a little bit later in the program about some of the Freethought activities in Central Florida. Freethought kind of became a name, a little bit more acceptable name for atheist, as did, I think, humanist. So I remember the first time I said the word to one of my employees, it was met with laughter, like, what the hell are you talking about? But I think what it is its foundation is that religion always imposes these concepts of guilt and personal inadequacy and all the tenets of the religion that are supposed to be obeyed without question. When one's mind is free of all of these ideologies and cult practices, then their mind is considered to be free.
Well, I think that despite all the contentiousness that sometimes accompanies the very thought of atheism or humanism or secularism or democracy or communism or anything else, the fact is that ours is an epoch in history. I mean, over the past 200 years or so, the world has changed dramatically. And you have to understand that a look at how the world was in the preceding 5,000 or 10,000 years is a very different world indeed. The rise of the scientific and technological revolutions has enabled people to look way beyond what their ancestors did and to see a world that's entirely different from those that their ancestors experienced. The thing that we need here in this discussion is basically you, the listener, because your ideas, intelligence, and your participation is really essential. We would really love to hear from you. And it doesn't have to be agreeable to us. In fact, if it isn't, the better. But if it is, that's fine too, because everybody contributes, and we want everybody to be able to feel comfortable in making whatever points you wish, and we will certainly respect that.
Jocelyn and David Williams are joining us from the Orlando area. Good evening to both. Talk to us.
Hey.
Hey, baby.
Hey.
All right, I hear you loud and clear.
Anything you want to say to weigh in on that topic? Because we're getting ready to move on to taxation.
Well, I'm perfectly happy to let them
Sure.
take over the show since they're kind enough to.
Yes.
Yes, let your wisdom flow freely.
Talk to us, David.
you guys covered a lot of it, but I do think there's one other point, and there's probably dozens of reasons. But I think that we've talked a lot about, having a common enemy is important to bring people together, and that common enemy gets smaller and smaller when we become more and more pluralistic. So the one with the most difference between religious people are the non-religious. So I think it's easy to find that as the ultimate other in those circumstances. But I think things are changing. Young people are caring less and less about religion, and I hope they care about humanist values and separation of church and state. But I think we're getting over the hill when it comes to that hatred and animosity, certainly in places like Orlando and Tampa, but I know there are other parts of the U.S., particularly the South, where it's a pretty big deal, not believing in God.
I wonder, too, if religionists often feel threatened by atheists because we can live without that dogma, without this concept of personal inadequacy and sin hanging over our heads. And when we can live free of that and they need to endure that all their lives, do they develop a sense of antagonism toward us because we don't need to subscribe to that? What do you think about that?
This is Jocelyn. I think a lot of it has to do with us and when I say us, I mean atheists being other. I think a lot of people who are in a religious environment don't necessarily realize that they know atheists, and they have preconceived notions of who and what we are, I guess you could say. And I think that what we can do, and I've lived my entire life as an atheist, and my parents are atheists, and my grandparents were atheists, and I think that if you get to know people and you volunteer with them and you work with them, I think you find that just letting people know that we're here, at that point they then say, wow, you guys are okay, a lot of times. I think that it's a misunderstanding in many ways in our modern life. Now, I think there are historical reasons why groups have, pointed us out as other, and we can look at biblical references and other things. But I think young people today, millennials, and now we have a new generation coming up, are going to be approaching this from a different perspective.
And let's not forget that a lot of people make a pretty darn good living selling animosity.
Oh, do they, my good man?
Well, in order to raise money, you need a cause.
That's right.
Okay, and whether that's abortion, or I'm reminded of
Somebody remind him. Education, that's a good one.
It was number 27.
Yes.
Number 27.
I mean, we're doing our part. You can sold an atheist for $2. Right?
Oh, it's an Erskine
Why
Caldwell
can't we
novel
jump
where
in?
the Sister Bessie is going to preach a sermon against black shirts because she needs the money, that's all, and that's an issue. Last week her sermon was against being left-handed. So any cause will do. And as I've said on any number of occasions, the abortion issue has been the best thing that ever happened to the fundamentalist religion. It's raised more money, 10 times as much money as the next two combined, I'm sure. Go ahead, Jocelyn. I don't intend to interrupt for long.
That's long enough.
I agree. I mean, I definitely think that abortion, if we look at historically, prior to the 1900s, abortion didn't have quite it had a stigma, but it was, from what I've read, because obviously I wasn't there was a different approach to this. You had a stigma, but it wasn't quite the same as it is today, where we have entire groups organized against people who support the right for women to choose. And this last election has definitely kind of cemented political parties in such a way that I think abortion was an issue that they used to get the election results they wanted. And that's very disappointing to me on many levels, but that's a different conversation.
You guys know that that abortion is in the Bible?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Instructions
the
on
adulterer's test.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the Old Testament, they put a woman to the test to see if she was an adulterer, and if I have my story straight, if the baby, they gave her a potion of some sort, and whether the baby lived or died, they told them whether or not it was actually the father of the child.
Right. It was a mixture of water and dirt from the synagogue floor, and if she drank it and it caused the child to abort, then it was clear that she was an adulteress.
Similar to the
Right.
test that was administered for witchcraft.
Yeah, right. Right.
I'm glad we took the abortion out of the church as well.
Not true.
Yeah, even a child wasn't even counted as a human being until it was over 1 year old, and in the list of fines or penalties for goring someone's ox, if you were to injure a pregnant woman and she's okay, but she has an abortion, there's no penalty for that.
Yeah, you mean if she had a miscarriage? Or something?
Miscarriage, excuse me, yes.
Well, Joe, let's talk about your favorite topic of the day, which is taxation of the churches.
All right. May I just take 1 second and our regular feature, our quote of the day?
Sure.
Today I'm going to quote again from Mr. Mencken, the Bard of Baltimore, H.L. Mencken, and he says, "We must respect the other fellow's religion, but only in the sense and to the extent that we respect his theory that his wife is beautiful and his children smart." So, H.L. Mencken. Jocelyn and David, please feel free to interject at any time. I'm going to talk about what is my least favorite subject, and that is taxes. Should we tax religion? Everyone knows it does hundreds of billions of dollars a year, and it functions a lot like a business, but I brought along a little graphic. Let me just...
Perfect for radio, huh?
Well, actually, we're being streamed live to the Internet. So for those of you who are watching on the Internet, you can see this. For those of you who can't, you can hear it.
Yeah, that's about 10 pounds of paper there.
It is.
Printed
it's
out
several
finally.
inches thick, printed out, and it is a list of the tax-exempt, just the churches, not Florida, mind you, but Pinellas County. There are 64 counties in Florida. This is a list of the tax-exempt institutions in Pinellas County. And this list was printed in 2006. It's 13 years old. And at that time, the valuation of these properties was over $1 billion. I'm sure it's more than that now. Quite a few of them in the 10, 20, $30 million range. I particularly like the First Baptist Church of Indian Rocks. They're a tax-exempt $30 million facility, but they would take busloads of people up to Clearwater to protest the fact that the city manager wanted to have a sex change operation. And I'm tired of subsidizing bigotry. I'm tired of subsidizing mythology, and I'm tired of subsidizing religion. I don't want to have to pay for someone else's religion, and even people who are believers shouldn't want to pay for someone else's religion. So that's a subject that will usually get a few phone calls. Let me just take another second here. I want to talk about, this was from a TV 10 report down in Coral Springs, Florida. And it involved pastors living in multi-million-dollar homes, but exempt from paying property taxes because their properties, their homes, are owned by churches. Neighbors say they never see any congregations coming there, but nevertheless, this guy has a 12,000 square foot home, assessed at $1.9 million. The previous owner was a Miami Dolphin football player. He paid $50,000 a year in property taxes. These guys don't pay anything.
Well, that's because it's not a home, it's a parsonage.
Well, that's right, it's a parsonage. I don't live in a $2 million home, and even if I did, I would still resent paying the property taxes on someone else's $2 million home. This is, it goes on, and that's nothing really fancy about the house, the spokesman said, even though it's worth $2 million. But it goes on to talk about the net worth of the owners and the fact that they have other properties that they defer as well. Again, I won't go into all of that. I will refer also to a guy who made the press quite a bit in the last few weeks because of his failure to open his church in Houston for refugees from the floods there. And that, of course, is Joel Osteen. He lives in a $12 million parsonage in Houston. Is there anybody here that objects to paying the taxes on Joel Osteen's house? I wish you'd pick up the phone and give us a call. But better yet, if there's anybody listening at the moment who thinks that it's a wonderful idea to pay the taxes on Joel Osteen's $12 million house, not to mention his 16,000 seat stadium that he owns as well.
Well, God has been very, very good to Joel Osteen.
Yeah, Joe, I think you raise a great point, and I think that for the sake of brevity, sometimes we miss some detail, and I just want to point out before the first caller comes in and says, well, nobody's paying those taxes, so it doesn't matter. And to your point, and I know we all understand this on the call, is we still have city, county, state, and federal services that have to be provided, whether for the physical property or the entity itself, and that's the taxes that aren't being paid. So that's the revenue that's not going into the local and the state and federal tax base that we all have to offset. And if I remember right, I think Ryan Cragen's done some research on this, and Joel Osteen is the picture of the person on the top of the Washington Post page when they talk about $82.5 billion with a B dollars a year back then, in the research he did, it's actually lost to tax-exempt churches.
Well, and now it's going a step beyond that. In the wake of the hurricanes in Texas and Florida, Senator Ted Cruz and 3 other Republican senators have introduced a bill that would make houses of worship, which I suppose would include these people's personal residences, if they're so registered, would make them eligible for government funds through FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. They're trying to get relief grants to fix up the churches. So now not only are they exempt from paying the taxes, but they're digging into the government coffers in the first step to getting direct government funding for these organizations and their buildings, which is also the same story with the voucher programs and public funding of what is almost always a religious school when it's a charter school, right?
And Mr.
This is Jocelyn. That's something I wanted to bring up as you were talking about this. We've seen religious organizations flocking to charter schools as a way to get public tax dollars to promote their agendas. We've seen religious schools simply close at the end of the school year and then reopen in the fall as a public charter school, a lot of times hiring the same teachers and taking on a lot of the same students. This is, in my opinion, an egregious use of our education funds on many levels. And we've got more than 600 charter schools now in the state of Florida. I don't know exactly how many of them are actually following a religious focus as far as their education goes. But I mean, we've seen
about 80% are religious, regardless of what they teach, right?
Sure. And the rumor is that they always provide a better quality of education, but how do we know, right? Because they aren't subjected to the same kind of
what test results there are available tend to show that they're not doing as well as public schools.
And that's even cherry picking the students.
Right.
Right? Mm-hmm. Which is really
weird.
Yeah,
they can refuse anybody they want.
Sure.
And they do. This has been demonstrated. Joe, I'm going to be the first caller who calls in and disagrees with you. I don't think we should be taxing the churches. Because I've not in my own mind come to satisfaction about how we can do that and not tax all 501c3 organizations. Because there's some 501c3s that are in churches that have mythology and have hate and have misogyny and have bigotry. So it's going to be hard to test all these organizations to that standard as much as I'd like to do it. So
I believe that's called
them to file a 990.
Donald Trump, isn't it? Is that what you just described? I'm not sure.
Well, we have to start somewhere.
And you didn't pay any taxes.
Starting with the 800-pound gorilla in the room would be a good place to start. And the argument that we ought not to do anything about problem A because there's problems B and C is, of course, a fallacy of logic, and that we ought not to do anything about rapists because there are murderers that we haven't caught yet. Same idea. So there are, I think, probably reasons not to tax churches. People usually come up with the trope that, they do so much charitable work. As a matter of fact, as a percentage of their income, their percentage of charitable work is far lower than secular charity groups, because the average secular charity doesn't have a monolithic cathedral that sits idle 95% of the time.
441.
And they got scrutiny.
Yes.
Yes, that's
And,
right.
and of course, that's the issue with the FEMA support, is that there's no accountability for the funds once they're delivered to the church.
The church is not just tax exempt; they don't have to account
for
anything, even though, as you know, Atheists of Florida is tax exempt. But we have paperwork that would tax an accounting nerd. Churches don't have to put up with any of that. They just stick it in their pocket. And
yeah, if we could know what these pastors and all the employees at the church make, like we do for groups like Alliance Defending Freedom, Liberty Council, First Liberty, I mean, all this information for what these people make and what these organizations make is out there, and it's not as horrifying because they're doing a different type of ministry, so to speak, than churches. But if we knew what everybody was making, I think that the parishioners would start giving a little bit less.
I think if we had a situation where all institutions were transparent, and we could see where the money was going, And at the same time, we would allow any institution to be able to claim a tax exemption on whatever it does that contributes to predefined public goods.
Right.
But they would be taxed on everything else. So let's say a church would be fully taxed, except for those times when they, say, gave a hurricane shelter. Then they would qualify for a certain discount on that. But otherwise, they pay the taxes like everybody else. And all other 501c3 organizations would do the same. That is, they would have the ability to show that they're contributing something to the public good. And that public good, of course, would be loosely defined, but would allow some sort of a principle to be applied to ensure fairness.
Unlike most...
Sounds like a tax deduction.
Go ahead, David.
You know? Sounds like a tax deduction is what we're talking about.
Yeah,
Just itemize your deductions. Yeah.
Unlike most 501cs, the amount of money that churches take in tends to be largely in cash or big chunks of cash, much more so than say, we would typically see. And that is, of course, once it's cash, it's quite easy to just stick it in your pocket and forget all about it.
Kind of like a casino, right?
There was an instance some months ago where Joel Osteen, somebody stole almost $200,000 in cash, and they didn't even know it was gone. For weeks, they have so much cash floating around there that the guy stole close to $250,000. They didn't even notice it. Is there anybody in our audience that wouldn't notice it if somebody stole $250,000 from
I don't know, but somebody in our audience wants to talk to us.
Well, put them on.
Go ahead, Atheist Forum. How can we help you?
Hi. Thanks very much for taking my call. It's kind of a two-part question having to do with taxation, and it's motivated by my cursory following of the history of Scientology, having to do with how easy is it to become a tax-exempt church. Certainly the statistics that Mr. Reinhardt showed suggests that it must be rather easy, although I know with Scientology it was an extensive and expensive legal battle for them to obtain tax-exempt status. So the first question is, do any of you know just kind of mechanically how easy it is or isn't to actually become a church? And then the second part of that question is, when and if we finally start taxing these entities, as of course we should, do you think it's more important that it happen at the state or local level? And the reason I ask that is thinking about Clearwater and all of the property that has been taken over by the Scientology and all of the tax dollars that have been denied to that municipality as part of that. So two parts. How easy is it to get that tax exemption? And if you're going to work to try to get them taxed, you want to focus on the state or the local level?
I think Reverend Reinhardt can answer that
Thank
question.
you so much, yes. Actually, I think the caller means federal or local, state and local, because state and local is pretty much the same, whereas federal is distinctly different. But as to your first question, some months ago, John Oliver on the Comedy Channel started his own church right on television. Wow. It was called Our Lady of the Perpetual Exemption. He filed for a certification with the IRS. Oh, he's on HBO, not the Comedy Channel, I've been told. Thank you so much for correcting me. Oh, I bit my lip. In any case, he started his own church right on television. I love the name again, Our Lady of the Perpetual Exemption. Wanda Sykes was his
Treasurer?
Well, treasurer and co-minister and co-fundraiser. In any case, he started getting literally seed gifts, human semen and other feces and other things in the mail. So he shut it all down. But he showed right on live television how difficult it was to start a church, which is you simply say that you are. There are right in the neighborhood of 35,000 different Christian denominations, just Christian denominations, walking around in the world today. So, again, that's a very clear example of how difficult it is to start a church. You could start one right now. We could start one on the air and start taking up donations right now. In fact, as I like to point out, I'm just in this for the money, and we want your money, so don't forget to go to our website. If you buy anything ever on Amazon, Go to Amazon Smile. If you log on through our website, we get a piece of that action. It doesn't cost you anything. So there's a plug for some money and the answer to your question. Now,
how can I turn my home into a parsonage?
Yes. Oh, that's, you certainly should.
It's actually, the IRS defines minister really vaguely, and the IRS doesn't have the ability to do a lot of investigation. So we've got an underfunded agency that is supposed to be somewhat monitoring this, and so obviously it's not going to be happening. And in fact, churches are not actually even required by law to file an application for tax exemption. Right. They just, they can choose to do so if they want to. But you're right, the John Oliver story is really funny, and I would encourage everyone to go view it.
I'm sure it's
find it on
available
YouTube.
HBO right away, so it's definitely worth watching. I myself am an ordained minister and a doctor of divinity. I have officiated at 2 weddings, and I have used my minister's card on at least 2 occasions to park in the clergy-only zone at the hospital. So it comes in pretty handy. I've never been able to take up a collection, but I'm willing to try. So I'd like to take on your next question, taxes at the federal or local level. And
keep talking.
Okay, no, I was just reading this note. So,
yes.
Frankly, I would rather see them taxed at the local level. The issue did come up some years ago, and they lost 8-1 in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said that the ability to tax was the ability to destroy, and for that reason it was a violation of the First Amendment. Even Justice Douglas came down with the majority on that, the most liberal, probably anti-religious justice I know of. But at the local level, as Jim Peterson pointed out earlier, we're paying for their police, their sewer, their fire protection. If there's a flood, we pay for the cleanup just like everyone else. And they ought to pay for their own services. I have a list right here of $1 billion worth of properties in a county with 1 million people. You can do the math on how much each of us has to chip in to support somebody else's fantasy land. So I would much rather see it on a state and local level. Most states have what's called a Blaine Amendment, which says you can't transfer money directly or indirectly to any religious organization, and they totally ignore that. So they're already breaking the law. If we could get them to enforce it, it would be a long way towards our goal.
On the phone with us, Jocelyn and David Williamson from Orlando, who are going to, in a few moments, tell us about free thought activity over there and the exciting Free Flow Conference coming up. We're going to take just a moment to tell you a little bit about Atheists of Florida, and then we'll come right back and talk about some other organizations around the state. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Sound like the Communist Manifesto? Not quite. In fact, it's the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. Yet in spite of its clarity, millions of Americans still believe the United States is a Christian nation. We know better, and we know the reasons we should never let the United States become anything other than what it is, a secular nation. Join us on the Atheist Forum every Sunday night, 8 o'clock, as we talk back to those who want to convert our nation into a theocracy here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Listen. Atheists of Florida is a nonprofit membership organization founded in 1992. For over 25 years, Atheists of Florida has brought atheists together to address state-church separation issues, provide legal assistance in cases of religious discrimination in employment or educational institutions, help atheists meet others who want to live their lives free of religion, and produce the Atheist Forum. For membership information, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com, where you'll find our newsletters, annual reports, statement of purpose, and information about meetings and events. That's atheistofflorida.com. You're spiritual. If God talks to you, you're nuts. All right. Jocelyn and David Williamson in Orlando. Tell us about your organization and others that are operating in the Central Florida area and any events that are coming up. that we want to know about?
The Atheist Forum. I'm glad to see you guys back on the air, and we're glad to be able to participate and wish you all the best. So, thoughts and prayers are with you guys.
We'll think about that.
That's legal as a tax exemption.
So I first met all you guys when I was down in Sarasota several years ago, and got involved in the movement there, and met my lovely wife Jocelyn on the internet in 2011, and moved up to Orlando, and they weren't doing any state church separation activism up here, and I tried to inspire some groups to do that, and they weren't as interested as I would have liked. I mean, you know many groups that have a focus and don't want to move from it, and that's certainly their choice. But and right around that time, groups were coming up in the area. The Black and Unbelievers of Metro Orlando has since formed. There's two Latino organizations for Libre Pensadores, free thinkers, and we had some high school student groups, and those have kind of waned, but we still have the Secular Student Alliance chapter at UCF, which is one of the strongest for many years in the U.S., and they're a big supporter of the conference that we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes. But so when we could not get anybody inspired to do any state church activism, we just decided to start doing it ourselves. So we founded in 5 years ago last month, and so only 20 years behind you guys over there. So we're a little late to the party, but we've been doing separation of state and church as our primary focus, and we're a chapter of the Freedom from Religion Foundation up in Madison, which, by the way, now has 9 attorneys working for them. So they're doing a lot of work across the country. Wow. So we focus on separation of church and state. We've had one lawsuit that we filed in 2013, which we count as successful, even though we didn't. Our attorneys did not get paid for their work. The Orange County School Board had a Bible distribution, and we attempted to participate with our literature. And as you can imagine, there was some objection to that. They censored our materials, and we fought and won that case. And with a little help from the devil himself, the Satanic Temple was part of the solution to that problem. They wanted to distribute an activity book, which was perfectly appropriate for elementary school kids, but as you can imagine, just the word satanic on the cover made it completely objectionable. So the forum all of a sudden closed like magic, and I call that Lucian's Law, after Lucian Greaves, the one of the founders and the spokesperson of the Satanic Temple. So that was the first major win we had, and we're now in the middle of a lawsuit. We should be hearing back any day from Brevard County, who basically told us that because we were non-believers, we were not eligible to deliver invocations in the Brevard County Commission, and so we're hopeful that will go in our favor, and that's in the 11th Circuit, in the 11th Circuit Federal Court in Orlando. So those are the kind of the activism that we're doing, and we started 2 years ago a speaking gig for people from around the state and around the country. And Jocelyn, you can talk about that.
Yeah, monthly educational events have really been tremendous for our organization. We realized that activism wasn't enough, that to actually, and this is something I would want to share with anyone trying to establish an organization and you're excited about activism, is you need community support. You need people that are going to donate, but also donate some time and energy to just keep everybody energized about the topics at hand. And having these educational events has done that. We've been able to bring in tremendous speakers. Tony Van Pelt was our first speaker, actually, when we kicked it off. And Dr. Ryan Cragen from your area has come over. And we've just been able to get anywhere from 60 to up to 200 people almost for our Darwin Day event, which was a monthly educational event, coming together on a monthly basis. And that's been great. But we also have a Freethought Cafe, which moves around our area, or the Orlando area is really quite large. And we tended at first to have meetings only in our area, but we decided that we really need to be reaching out all across Central Florida. And this is just popping up in a coffee shop, announcing it in these different groups, and anywhere from 10 to 30 people will show up on a Sunday morning and just have some great conversation. We also have a women's group. We were meeting weekly. We're now meeting about twice a month. We realized that weekly was a big push. We've got a book club that's been going for almost 3 years now. Again, this is on a monthly basis. Also, we have parenting groups, and I created something called the Science League for Kids. And this was because my son was in Boy Scouts, and at the time he was asked to confirm his faith during his third grade year. And I said, you know what, I think we can do something else. And we now are in our, I guess, 5th year of the Science League for Kids. And we've got somewhere between 30 families involved with kids' activities on a monthly basis. So that's just some of the things that we're doing as a community organization.
That's a lot of stuff.
I'm
impressed.
I'd like to add, I saw on the news that Freedom from Religion Foundation had donated right at $100,000 to Harvey and Irma and Maria victims. So atheists are out there helping other people. I don't know why they do that. I don't understand why they're not all solipsists like me, but it's up to them.
Well, it takes a long time.
The FFRF is tremendously generous, and I also think they've been working with the Foundation Beyond Belief, which is an atheist donation hub sort of thing for different issues going on worldwide. So I would, again, the Foundation Beyond Belief is a great organization for that sort of donation work. And I don't think David said this, something that I think as a co-founder of the CFFC that I'm really proud of is that we've given more than 50 invocations in the Central Florida area, and we just continue to grow with this sort of impact with our local government. And this is something that any group can start getting involved with, and we hope to help more groups expand this across the state.
Yeah, we've had an opportunity to give a few invocations over here on around the Tampa Bay area. In fact, I believe Joe and I both participated in that, and a good number of other people did as well. One of the things that I think we can take advantage of is the fact that we are, in fact, living in an age of transition. Things aren't the same as they were. And I was thinking about this when Joe was describing the tax situation, because we have fewer and fewer people expressing a belief in or membership in any of the churches. And yet the tax support for the churches remains the same. So that means that with fewer and fewer believers, more and more taxpayers are paying for the physical facilities that they get to, the 10 or 12 people in the 600-seat auditorium are getting together in. So it's about time that we started to make our muscles felt in the outside world. We are much bigger than people commonly suppose. People who believe as we do that perhaps the religious and superstition basis of a bunch of our history is being undone, and that the scientific and technological revolutions have made a good deal of inroads, as well as the advanced social situation. We are living in a time when people who are gay or people who are atheists and so forth, and expressing other minority viewpoints and opinions, are much more prevalent, much more welcome than we commonly think we are. So let's get out there, organize, join. We have lots of organizations. We have here the Coalition of Reason, that is a group that coalesces about 13 organizations in the Tampa Bay area. We have a website, coalitionofreason.com, Tampa Bay coalitionofreason.com, and just go there, and this organization, Atheists of Florida, is included in that number. But get out there and do something. Join in. We need your energy. We need your money, and we'll see you there.
But of course, I think what really accentuates what you're talking about is the fact that we have Betsy DeVos and our Vice President Pence, who are people who clearly want to convert this country into a theocracy. We have judges on the Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas, and these people are relentless in their effort to eliminate the public school completely, turn all education over to the churches. And where's that article? There you go. And the same thing with legal rulings that would essentially follow biblical instead of constitutional laws. Here in Pinellas County, the school signed off on a potential lawsuit. Well, which is they're joining with Polk County, Orange County, Miami-Dade, Palm Beach, Broward, and 6 other state school districts in agreeing to share the cost of a legal challenge to a new education law in Florida. That's HB 7069. And among other things, it requires school districts to share taxpayer money with charter schools. Charter schools do not need to prove that they even need the money. So if you think this is just sort of a social issue where atheists want to get together and have lunch together, think again, my child. There is a very concentrated and well-funded and serious effort underway in this country to turn it into a theocracy. And boy, when that happens, the gunfire may not be far behind.
And it's important to remember that the people who are doing this are a minority. Trump was elected by a minority of the voters. And that means not just that it's a few million votes off. It means that basically, since so few people participated in the election in the first place, only about a quarter of the electorate actually put him in office. And that means that for those who stayed home, were inactive or inert, didn't do anything, you're now paying the price. But it's a good reason to get on the stick now and join up, do something.
You know, if
the people have joined national and local organizations in a frenzy in the last 10 months. It's been nice to see and actually experience ourselves. So hopefully you guys saw an uptick as well.
That's true.
Well, you know, if they are able to get rid of the public education system in this country, it's at least a double-barreled victory for the religious right. First of all, they can have their own schools and pray all they want and force everybody to pray and indoctrinate young, impressionable minds at an age before they're old enough to know better. And secondly, they destroy the teachers' union, which is one of the few remaining unions that has any number and any strength. And if they get rid of the teachers' union, then the labor movement suffers, and of course wages go down and on and on and on. So it's a multifaceted victory for the religious right if they can destroy the public
I
schools.
think it also creates a society of haves and have-nots. I think that families that are involved in their kids' education, that are engaged with the teachers that their children are interacting with, they're going to make sure that their kids are going to a school that's providing the best education they can get. It's the families and the parents that are working 2 jobs, that have so much going on in their lives that they're not able to be as engaged in their kids' education. These are the kids that are going to be the most impacted from the money that we're sucking out of the public education. And that's my concern, is that we're going to end up with this society of haves and have-nots. And the fact is, based on from what I've read, when you have an uneducated population, you end up having people that don't vote. Or if they do vote, they're easily swayed by messages that don't contain any real information.
Sure.
Right.
And that's also an impact of what's going on.
I don't want to detract from that message because it's a very important and very serious one that demands several programs on its own. But we did want to mention, of course, Free Flow, which is the major event in the humanist freethought community here in Florida. And I know that your group is sponsoring it. I'm looking forward to going there on October the 20th to the 22nd. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the Florida Humanist Association is the sponsor. So Jocelyn and I are on the board of the Florida Humanist Association, and we were talking before about Central Florida Freethought Community. So let me switch hats here real quick. This is, like you said, actually the Southeast's only regular Freethought conference. The 3-day event kicks off October 20th with a party on that night with costumes and karaoke. You don't have to do either, but you can do both if you want. That starts at about 7 o'clock, and there'll be a judge's costume on Saturday and Sunday.
I'm afraid you're breaking up on us a little.
Oh, sorry. Is that any better?
Yes.
Yeah, keep going.
That part was.
So David Silverman from American Atheists, Ryan Cragen, who we talked about before, Sincere Carabo, American Humanist Association, 2 of the attorneys from the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Our keynote speaker is Eugenie Scott, former founding director of the National Center for Science Education, focused squarely on climate change and evolution and keeping those in the schools as instruction. And she's one of 3 science educators. We got Florida teachers from high schools coming to talk about how we can help make sure that science education stays solid in Florida. And Jocelyn, you want to talk about Saturday night?
Sure.
Yeah, sure. Saturday night we have actually a dinner planned with 3 comedians, the American Heretics Comedy Tour. These guys are progressive and rationally minded, free-thinking, and they're really, really funny, and you can Google them and you will see what I mean. And we are going to have them there. We're excited about that. There's also trivia afterwards. One of the most exciting parts that I really want to put out there is that we have Camp Quest, and this is a camp experience that, you know, most of us, if we went to camp as a kid, we're going to remember, but their focus is science, nature, and humanist values, and they're bringing it to Florida in summer of 2018. And to kind of preview it, they're going to be offering free childcare at Free Flow for families with kids ages 5 to 12. So this is a great opportunity for parents. We also are going to be having Camp Quest happen, as I said, next August in Central Florida. It'll be at Wekiwa Springs Park here in Central Florida. It's for the whole state, and I hope families will be involved with that. Free Flow is going to be a lot of fun. I just want to reiterate, yes, we have these incredible speakers and all of this other stuff, but it's so invigorating to get together with 200, 300 other like-minded people and have wonderful, rational conversations. And we're going to encourage people to meet up by, you know, what part of the state they're from and get to know new people and share ideas and hear some awesome talks. So I really hope that anyone who's hearing this will consider coming out to Free Flow. It's going to be a great conference.
We'll sure remind our listeners of it every week up until the event happens, and I know we'll be there. The Atheists of Florida will have a table there, and we'll meet a lot of you. And Jocelyn and David Williamson, I want to thank you for being on the show. If you're ever in the Tampa Bay area on a weekend, I hope you'll make an appearance in the studio. We'd love to have you both or either one of you in.
In the meantime, for our listeners, you can Google Free Flow, FREEFLO, and that's in that way you can learn more about the event and register right there on the page. So we'll see you there.
Next week we're going to have a good guest. Just kidding. No, it's going to be a fellow named Brandon Hott, who's a former Marine Corps combat correspondent and public information officer with the Volusia County Sheriff's Office. He's taught biology and currently teaches environmental science, and that means among the topics he covers are evolution and climate change, 2 of our favorites. He's a founding board member and volunteer communications director for Florida Citizens for Science. He will be right here. We'll invite you to call in and join us here on the Atheist Forum. Hope you'll join us again next week. And now, along with Jim Peterson and Joe Reinhardt, I'm Ed Golly, reminding you that if the story seems just a little too implausible to be true, don't believe it just because somebody wrote it down.
Make them prove it.
Thanks to David and Jocelyn.
You have been listening to the Atheist Forum. To learn more about Atheists of Florida, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com. Continue the discussion on our website, talk.aof.ngo. Join us again next Sunday for another edition of the Atheist Forum here on Tan Talk 1340.